I said approve it, Brenda. The cursor on my screen blinked like it was waiting for me to blink too, but I didn't. I stared straight ahead at the spreadsheet Dylan had just dropped into our 9 a.m. sync like it was a breakfast grenade, full of red flags, half-labeled data columns, and a laughably missing validation chain. No sign-off from compliance, no timestamp from ops, and it doesn't even meet the rollback criteria, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. You're asking us to push this into staging with no QA, he cut me off. My word is the only approval you need. Now you're fired. There was a pause, a real one. The kind of pause where you could hear the intern's cold brousselache as he shifted in his seat, and the project manager's wedding ring tapped nervously against her coffee cup. No one breathed. Dylan grinned like he'd just farted in church and expected applause. I said what I said. He added, shrugging, let's move on. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even say goodbye. I just clicked leave meeting, closed my work laptop, and stared at the smudged window above my kitchen sink where the sun hit the rim of my overwatered spider plant like it didn't just witness a career homicide. I exhaled once. Then I opened my personal email, created a folder named Dylan, because I'm petty but organized, and started collecting, bit by digital bit, what that man thought he could bury. And listen, before I go further, I know 90% of y'all just listen to these stories without subscribing, but if this corporate guillotine tale grabs you, go ahead and tap that follow button. Toss in a like. It keeps the algorithm demons fed and our little storytelling rebellion alive. Now, back to the burning wreckage. It wasn't that I didn't see this coming. I just thought I had a few more weeks. Dylan had been unraveling slowly ever since whispers of the acquisition started circulating like gossip in the ladies' room at an HR convention. He didn't understand the systems. He didn't care about protocols. And most of all, he hated being told no, especially by women who actually read the documentation. So when I said no, publicly, he snapped like a breadstick under stress. I knew better than to argue. I knew better than to scream. I'd been a woman in tech too long to think dignity comes from winning a shouting match with a guy who uses PowerPoint transitions like a threat. Instead, I backed up. I went into the shared drive and pulled every change of control planning doc I'd ever touched. Every ops checkpoint, every compliance crosswalk. I opened my secured folder and hovered for a second over the one file that still had a little red lock icon on it, COC Protocol's internal V4 signatory PDF. I didn't open it, not yet. Just seeing the name gave me more comfort than any rage tweet ever could, because that file was my insurance. 3 months ago, I'd been roped into a late-night review with the VP of Compliance, who, between dry sighs and drier Chardonnay, explained that during acquisition prep, they needed to assign a single neutral party to validate the system handoff protocol. Someone who wasn't high enough to tank negotiations, but wasn't so low they'd be ignored. They picked me. At the time, I was flattered. It felt like recognition. I signed the policy doc, acknowledged the clause, and tucked it away in my FYI Keep Forever folder. No ceremony, just a sentence. Any change in signatory status must be disclosed and reattested by board authority or risk noncompliance. It didn't seem important then. Now it was everything. HR would call in a few hours, I knew. They'd phrase it as a mutual parting of ways. I'd be encouraged to reflect on tone. But I wasn't waiting. I was writing, to my lawyer, to myself, and to every system we used that logged sign-in metadata. Because Dylan might have thought his word was gospel, but the server logs said otherwise. And in corporate America, the servers never lie. 3 weeks before Dylan went full Shakespeare in the conference call and screamed his way through my termination, I had already seen the fault line forming. I could feel it in the way approvals were being rushed, paper trails went missing, and emails suddenly included a new string of CCs who seemed to exist solely to dodge responsibility. I remember the night I wrote the memo like it was etched in migraine. Friday, 10:47 p.m., me in sweats, microwaving a lean cuisine that would betray me in under 6 hours. The Jenkins report was due Monday, and I was triple-checking data dependencies when I saw the merge request from one of Dylan's pet analysts, someone with the attention span of a wet crouton. No approval chain, no compliance tag. Just a sloppy commit note that read, per D. I blinked, then I pulled up the access logs. Dylan had greenlit it manually. No backup sign-off, no escalation. Not even a Slack message to the systems team. That's not just lazy. That's violation of policy lazy. So I did what no one in corporate America wants to do unless they've already had 3 whiskeys or a mental breakdown. I opened a new Outlook draft addressed to legal. Subject line, signatory process breach urgent review recommended the body of the email wasn't poetic. It didn't need to be. It was bullets and timestamps and a PDF export of the merged files with a footer note. These changes bypassed protocol per internal policy COC 74B. Potential downstream liability change of control at a station if not resolved pre-acquisition. I CC'd compliance. I BCC'd myself. I attached the memo I'd already drafted that outlined 3 prior instances where Dylan had steamrolled approvals verbally. I ended with request confirmation of policy standing before Q3 data consolidation. Please advise if signatory list has been updated or revoked. No one replied. Not Monday, not the week after, not ever. It didn't surprise me. Legal in our company was a black hole of plausible deniability. It existed to look confused on Teams calls and misplace attachments. Still, I'd done my due diligence. I'd built the breadcrumb trail, and more importantly, I'd kept the receipt. What Dylan didn't know, what no one besides me, the VP of Compliance and a very bored IT administrator knew, was that 3 months prior, I'd been looped into something rare, a need-to-know clause. It was late April, a Thursday, and the VP of Compliance had asked if I could sit in on a quick doc review. She was going through legacy language in our acquisition prep paperwork and needed someone fluent in ops systems, which, lucky me, meant I got pulled in like a substitute teacher for corporate policy hell. That's when I saw it. A clause buried under 4 subheaders and 3 levels of indentation. Bolded once, forgotten by most, change of control validation, signatory to B operational systems, B Alvarez, me, I thought this would be a formality I'd said at the time. It is, she replied, pouring wine into a coffee mug unless someone screws up. I printed it anyway, not out of paranoia, out of habit. I'm a process person. A save to PDF and name it properly person. I don't trust the cloud with your job person. I printed the clause. I initialed the footer. I slid it into the battered red folder under my desk labeled Helixon Keep till death. One signature. Mine. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with my employment spontaneously combusted, I pulled that folder out. There it was. Crisp, clean, timestamped by the doc management system. Brenda Alvarez, listed signatory, required for COC compliance attestation on all Q3 platform handoffs. And Dylan, he didn't just violate protocol. He violated me. By firing a named signatory without board override, he turned a dirty little workflow shortcut into a full-blown acquisition landmine. And the fuse had been lit 3 weeks ago. He just never bothered to check who was holding the match. The HR call lasted 6 minutes. I counted. Brenda, we're so sorry things escalated, said Dana from HR. That overly delicate tone corporate folks use when they're trying to convince you to sign your own pink slip. Dylan's account of the meeting suggests you were insubordinate and, well, confrontational. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I see. We'll be processing this as a voluntary resignation, mutual, of course. We're waiving the 2-week requirement, and you'll receive the standard exit paperwork by EOD. Great, I said. Then I'll need my full personnel file. Every revision, every performance evaluation, and all manager feedback on record. Dana hesitated, just long enough for me to know she hadn't expected that. Of course, she replied tightly. I'll submit the request, 6 minutes. That's how long it takes to dissolve 4 years of service, 3 systems overhauls, 2 internal audits, and a spotless performance record. Neutered down to voluntary departure in a spreadsheet cell that would be forgotten by Friday. Fine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight the resignation narrative. I had no interest in wasting oxygen on people who believed Dylan was anything but a liability wrapped in khakis and caffeine addiction. Let them believe what they wanted. They'd learn the truth soon enough, one clause at a time. Later that evening, while clearing out my home workspace, I got a ping on Signal. Not Slack, not email. Signal, it was from Tanya, one of the quiet engineers who preferred code to conversation. I heard, I'm sorry, Dylan's a garbage disposal with Bluetooth. Just FYI, they're closing the deal next week. You were supposed to validate the handoff file. Your initials are still in the timeline slide. I stared at the message for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen like it needed clearance to breathe. They hadn't replaced me. They hadn't even tried. They just assumed that if they called it a resignation, the systems would rewire themselves and the acquisition would slide forward like butter on a hot griddle. I went to my personal Gmail and typed exactly 1 sentence. Please prepare a response brief regarding premature termination of a contractually bound compliance signatory under an active change of control scenario. I hit send to my lawyer and sat back in my chair. Across the kitchen, the soft whir of my ancient fridge hummed like a lullaby for the legally blind. The rest of the apartment was silent. But inside, I could hear it click, the sound of a machine locking into place. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Dylan anymore. It was about showing every single executive in that building what happens when you fire a process specialist without checking the process. Because somewhere, in a shared folder they hadn't updated since Q2, my name was still listed next to 2 little words, signatory pending. And no one, not legal, not HR, not even the CEO, had bothered to check whether pending meant required. But the buyer's legal team would. Oh, they would, and by then I wouldn't need to speak. I'd already said everything that mattered on paper with a timestamp and a clause nobody read. Yet, by Tuesday the sharks had sniffed blood, but they weren't swimming in our waters. They were upstream. In the marble-floored offices of Cavest and Grange LLP, the white shoe legal firm hired by the acquiring company. These were the kind of lawyers who used fountain pens and wore suits tailored to conceal the daggers in their back pockets. Nothing got past them, not even a missing comma in a change clause. So when one of their junior auditors spotted the absence of a critical signature, in the Q3 merger timeline. It lit up their inboxes like a Christmas tree laced with subpoenas. The missing checkpoint, operational system validation Brenda Alvarez. The signatory line was there. The name was there. The effective date of designation was there. The signature, nowhere. And that's when Dylan, in all his spiritual and strategic poverty, made his second catastrophic mistake. "We'll just reassign the sign-off," he said, allegedly during a call with the buyer's audit liaison. Probably with his feet on the desk, chewing his gum like power came from molars. You can almost hear the collective sphincter clench on the other side of the call. See, change of control clauses aren't finger paintings. You don't get to redraw them with crayons and say it's fine because Brenda left. Signatories aren't ornamental. They're contractual landmines, and I was one of them. That little sentence, "will just reassign the sign-off," triggered a cascade. Within hours, formal notice went out from Cavest and Grange to Hellickson's legal, and the M and a team. It was polite in tone but surgical in intent. "Please provide documentation regarding reassignment protocol of signatory 2B per change of control clause, including board override or formal revocation process. Failure to do so may constitute a breach of pre-close compliance attestation." Translation: where the hell is Brenda's signature? And who gave you the right to erase her? Back inside Hellickson's walls, panic was still just a whisper. Dylan reportedly brushed it off in the weekly exec sync. "They're just covering their asses," he said, to a room full of people too scared or too complicit to correct him. Someone, maybe finance, maybe that poor soul in systems who once needed a tutorial on how to lock a spreadsheet, muttered something about contractual language and binding clauses. Dylan steamrolled through it with a shrug and a line about how lawyers love paperwork. But the buyer's team wasn't asking for paperwork. They were asking for blood. And the deeper they dug, the more rot they found. The compliance team, now wide awake and 5 coffees deep, began fielding questions they hadn't even considered. Who had authorized Brenda's removal? Where was the formal override? Was there a documented revocation of her signatory status? The answer to all three. There wasn't one. There couldn't be one. Because I had never resigned from the clause, I'd only been terminated from my job. And unless Dylan had gotten the board to formally revoke my signatory role, an action that requires a vote, minutes, and notification to the acquiring party, then as far as the buyers were concerned, I was still standing in the doorway with my arms crossed, refusing to let this deal move forward. And what's worse, they were right. I wasn't trying to block the deal. I wasn't bitter or looking for attention. I was simply following protocol, the same way I always had. But now my absence was a legal riddle the buyers couldn't ignore. My missing signature wasn't a footnote. It was a bullet point on a compliance checklist that, if left blank, would require them to re-audit the entire operational platform or risk inheriting a non-compliant system architecture. That's 7 weeks of delay, minimum. With penalties, so the buyers did what they do best. They flagged it. They raised the issue to material compliance gap status. And with that classification, they dropped the first grenade on Dylan's desk, not with a bang, but with an Excel sheet marked critical variance and a note that simply said, "Pending Brenda Alvarez reattestation or approved override. Resolution required pre-close." Dylan probably laughed when he saw it, but I bet the CEO didn't. The next domino didn't fall, it detonated. By Wednesday morning, Hellickson's legal team finally yanked their heads out of their comfort zones and into the reality that a multimillion-dollar acquisition was about to be gutted by a missing signature. Someone in legal, probably that one paralegal who actually reads things before rubber stamping them, started backtracking through the audit trail. They were looking for anything that would justify reassigning my validation role without a board override. That's when they found it, the memo. Buried in a subfolder within the compliance drive, inside a directory named Migration Backup OLD, someone unearthed a PDF titled Signatory Path Deviation Risk Flag 3 Weeks Pre-Close, authored by Brenda Alvarez. Time-stamped, 3:14 a.m., 3 weeks before my firing. They say your words come back to haunt you. I didn't expect mine to wear a suit and carry a $90,000 invoice from Cavest and Grange. The contents of the memo weren't dramatic. I'm not a dramatic person. It was structured like everything I do, tight, technical, and cold as a mortuary drawer. It outlined Dylan's verbal override of system validations. It provided specific workflow gaps and attached screenshots from our CI/CD tool, showing his override in action with no accompanying sign-offs. But the line that mattered, the one that would end up being printed, highlighted, and passed from board member to board member with growing dread, was this: any changes to signatory control without prior written authorization void the compliance attestation under policy COC 74B. That sentence was everything, because it meant that even if Dylan had reassigned me, even if someone else had slapped their initials on the file, it wouldn't count unless the board formally approved it in writing before the handoff. And guess what? There was no override, no signature from the board, no notification to the buyers, no revocation logged in the policy tracker, which meant the compliance attestation wasn't just incomplete, it was void. And now the deal wasn't just delayed, it was radioactive. But the icing on the flaming cake, the part that turned this from a mid-level mistake into a corporate cardiac event? My name, not just on the memo, but on the internal policy document it referenced. The one someone in compliance had quietly updated months ago after that wine-stained review session with the VP. I had been officially logged as signatory 2B under change of control operations. And while Dylan had fired me, he'd never removed me from that document, which meant the buyers were right, their required checkpoint was missing. No workaround, no verbal override, no corporate fairy dust to poof it away. Legal, now fully on fire, scrambled to contain the blast radius. They drafted retroactive overrides, they called emergency meetings, they even tried to reach out to the buyer's legal team with clarifying language. But the buyers didn't want clarifying language, they wanted a signature. My signature. And when they didn't see it, they didn't ask questions. They sent warnings. Every hour they waited for a fix cost money. Every unanswered email ticked closer to invoking the delay clause. Meanwhile, back in my apartment, I was curled up on the couch, sipping cheap tea, watching the Helixon stock ticker twitch like a dying fish. I wasn't celebrating, not really. But I also wasn't surprised. I knew what would happen when they read that memo because I wrote it for them. Not for Helixon, not for Dylan, not even for legal, for the ones who'd notice, for the ones who'd care. And now that it had resurfaced, it was doing what I never had to, raise its voice. It hit the C-suite like a drone strike. Thursday morning, 7:26 a.m., the CEO of Helixon, Robert Caldwell, whose soul was probably carbonated with stock options, was yanked out of his pre-meeting coffee meditation by a flagged email with the subject line: immediate attention. Signatory breach risk of acquisition, delay, no one uses red font unless they want to ruin someone's morning, and this email was dressed for war. It came from the lead counsel at Cavest and Grange and didn't mince words. In 4 paragraphs, it outlined the following. The compliance validation checkpoint tied to change of control had failed due to missing authorization of signatory reassignment. The memo from Brenda Alvarez, timestamped, detailed, and specific, had surfaced as prior documentation against the reassignment. The change of control clause clearly named Brenda Alvarez as signatory 2B for ops system handoff, and there was no override or removal recorded or disclosed, unless the acquiring firm received a valid attestation from the original signatory or a documented board-approved override. The entire compliance section of the merger was considered invalid. And here was the killer blow. Per clause 9.2 of the M and agreement, failure to deliver verified compliance attestation by EOD Friday triggers automatic delay penalties and opens renegotiation terms. Translation: fix this now or the deal stalls. Costs skyrocket and your shareholders get pitchforks. Caldwell summoned legal, compliance, and Dylan to the 18th floor glass box where real decisions are made and scapegoats are an endangered species. Dylan walked in late, of course, flashing that smug used car dealer energy, and a protein bar in one hand like this was all just a clerical error the interns would sort out. They're bluffing, he said, dismissing the email without reading past the third bullet. It's an internal document, they can't void us on that. Caldwell didn't speak right away. He just passed the printed memo across the table like he was handing over a death certificate. The general counsel said one line, she cited the clause before the signature attempt. That makes it binding. Dylan shifted, suddenly less casual. I mean, she was already gone by then. No, the VP of Compliance corrected, deadpan. She was terminated after the clause would have required her signature, which wasn't obtained, which is why this is now a crisis. That's when the subpoena hit my inbox. Well, not technically a subpoena. A formal request for supporting documentation under cooperative clause review, wrapped in polite legalese. But we all knew what it meant. The buyers were ready to torch the earth unless they got answers, and they wanted them from me. I didn't hesitate. I responded with a zip folder labeled COC Support BA. Inside, the original memo, the internal policy file showing me listed as signatory 2B, the approval email from compliance, and yes, the signed copy of the change of control clause with my initials and date. No commentary, no emojis, no gloating, just facts. 10 minutes later, I got a reply, received. Thank you for your cooperation. Dylan, meanwhile, was on the 18th floor explaining to the CEO why he'd fired a compliance signatory during the most sensitive pre-close phase of a $280 million acquisition. Caldwell's face, I'm told, did a slow death march from annoyance to concern to something resembling grief, because now it wasn't just a signature. It was a gaping liability, and it had a timestamp. And a name. Mine. The emergency board meeting was called for 6:00 p.m. A desperate time that only meant one thing in corporate. Somebody fed up, and it wasn't going to stay quiet. Helixon's boardroom, typically a pristine aquarium of curated smiles and ego-polished jargon, now smelled faintly of panic and citrus disinfectant. The assistant who laid out the waters was shaking. Legal was hunched in the corner, flipping through red-tabbed binders like they could find God between pages 72 and 73. and Dylan. Dylan looked relaxed. He strolled into the room in his usual swagger suit combo, tie slightly askew for that fake I've been grinding all day look, and parked himself dead center at the conference table like this was his show. To him, this was theater. The kind where the critics always clap because they don't want to admit they missed the plot. Robert Caldwell, CEO and crown wearer of this mess, sat at the head of the table with the expression of a man trying to breathe through a sealed Ziploc. His phone kept buzzing. His jaw never moved. One by one, board members filed in. Stern, quiet, all of them holding the same thing, a printed email with my name at the top. I wasn't there, of course. I didn't need to be. I had already said everything that mattered, and someone, probably compliance, probably terrified, had passed my final email to the full board. The company's general counsel stood, nodded to Caldwell, and began reading aloud. She didn't summarize. She didn't paraphrase. She read the clause verbatim. Section 7D, Change of Control Compliance at a Station Requirements, Signatory 2B Operational Systems, Brenda Alvarez. She flipped to the next page. Clause 9.2, Signatory Integrity. Any termination of the listed signatory, without board override prior to re-attestation. Voids attestation. The room went dead silent. Dylan leaned back in his chair, arms folded like this was all beneath him. He smirked. This is procedural, he said. We reassign sign-offs all the time. It's a formality. But his voice cracked just slightly at the end, barely enough to notice. Just enough for a real lawyer to hear. One board member, Elaine, the one who used to run federal contracts, looked up from the printed clause with the expression of a woman calculating the cost of fireproofing her retirement. Was there a board override? She asked, her voice sharp as a paper cut. No one answered. Caldwell's knuckles went white against the table edge. General counsel continued reading. This time my final email, short, precise, surgical. Please see attached, clause 7D, timestamped and acknowledged. This shall serve as written notice of non-attestation. Dylan opened his mouth to respond, but Caldwell cut him off. What did you just say last week? He asked, quiet as static. That her firing wouldn't touch the deal? Dylan stammered. It's an internal compliance structure, not enforceable at deal level. They're bluffing, they're not bluffing, Elaine interrupted, lifting the email. She's right. If we didn't override her role officially in writing, we don't have a valid compliance attestation. Buyers have grounds to delay or renegotiate, and they're already moving. Another board member, a former VP at some other firm now enjoying his paid seat at this table, added grimly, we're the ones in breach, not them. Dylan looked around the room like he'd just realized the movie he thought he was starring in was a documentary, and he was the headline. Robert Caldwell didn't say a word. He just reached for the speakerphone and dialed. Get legal and PR in here. He said flat, we're going to need a statement. And someone find Brenda Alvarez, now. Dylan was still clinging to the last threads of his illusion like a raccoon with a melted Snickers bar, sticky, desperate, and entirely unaware he was already trapped. She wasn't even on payroll when she sent that email, he argued, louder now, a little faster. It's not binding. It's advisory at best. We can argue she didn't have standing. She was no longer an employee. The boardroom didn't respond. Not with words. Not yet. Just chairs creaking under tension and a few subtle exhales that sounded like tire leaks. Elaine, still holding the printed clause like it was a verdict, looked at general counsel. Is that true? The lawyer didn't speak immediately. Instead, she opened a second folder, black, unmarked, but bloated with every damning detail legal hoped would never see sunlight. Inside was a printed copy of my final email. She flipped it around and slid it across the table. It was simple. No pleasantries, no flair, just the kill shot. Please see attached, clause 7D, timestamped and acknowledged. This shall serve as written notice of non-attestation. Sent 9:42 p.m. Same day I was terminated. But and here's the part Dylan didn't realize, sent before HR officially processed the exit paperwork. That little procedural delay, it made all the difference. She was still technically on the books. She was still in every legal sense a signatory. General counsel adjusted her glasses, voice neutral but lined with buried panic. She sent it prior to HR's timestamped completion of termination. Technically, she acted within her authority window. And this, she tapped the email, is documented notice that she withheld at a station, as required by the clause. The air dropped 10 degrees. It wasn't just cold now, it was glacial. Robert Caldwell, the CEO, leaned back slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers twitched like they were itching for a pen or a weapon. You're saying the buyers are right? He asked, not to Dylan, to the lawyer. Yes, she said softly. They flagged it as a material compliance breach because it is one. Her clause was never formally revoked, the override was never filed, and she gave written, timestamped notice that she did not attest. The silence that followed wasn't blank. It was loaded, thick with the sound of egos buckling under the weight of their own hubris. Then Caldwell turned to Dylan, and for once, Dylan had nothing cocky to say. He just stared. Caldwell's voice, when it finally came, wasn't loud. It was soft, too soft. The kind of quiet that means someone's done yelling and started calculating consequences. Please, he said, not looking away from Dylan, tell me she didn't get that in writing. Dylan's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't answer, he didn't need to. The timestamp had already spoken. By Friday morning, the news broke. The acquisition was temporarily paused due to unresolved compliance documentation. According to the press release, corporate speak for someone lit the deal on fire and no one can find the extinguisher. Helixson's share price hiccuped, then dropped 3 points by noon. Not catastrophic, not yet. But investors could smell blood in the conference room, the kind of blood that comes with board reshuffles and emergency audits. The buyers? Oh, they were surgical. They invoked Clause 9.2 of the M and agreement, triggering an automatic freeze and delay penalties. The contract, now radioactive with legal footnotes, required full reattestation of all compliance checkpoints, including mine. And since the original signatory, "Hi, it's me," had officially declared non-attestation, it couldn't just paste in a new name like a cheap label over a cracked bottle. The systems would need to be revalidated, reports recompiled, new oversight appointed, minimum delay 6 weeks, penalty cost $4.7 million, reputation damage immeasurable. Back at Helixson HQ, Dylan was quietly escorted out of the building just before lunch. No announcement, no ceremony, just an internal memo that used the phrase administrative leave pending investigation like a white flag soaked in passive aggression. Someone saw him in the parking garage later that day, slamming the door of his Tesla and yelling into his Bluetooth headset like the world had betrayed him. The world hadn't. He had. By mid-afternoon, the board was in full containment mode. PR was writing fiction at press speed. Legal was triaging contracts like battlefield medics. Caldwell had locked himself in his office and was taking back-to-back investor calls, each one a new version of the same question. Why the hell didn't you read the clause? Meanwhile, I was at home. Same apartment, same chipped coffee mug, different atmosphere. I sat on my worn-out couch, sunlight cutting through the dusty blinds like it had a purpose for once. The TV was muted, flashing a news ticker that read, Helixson acquisition paused pending compliance review. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But my lips curled just enough to scare the spider plant on the windowsill. Then my phone buzzed. One new message, unknown number. Clause held, you did it. I stared at it for a second, then took another sip of coffee, the kind that always tasted slightly burnt but somehow perfect on days like this. The irony didn't escape me. Dylan thought his word was the only one that mattered. Turns out, the only word that counted was mine. And I didn't even have to raise my voice. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.